I call the honourable member for Fraser.
Syria is a nation not unlike ours. We both have a population of approximately 22.5 million people. We both have long and ancient cultures that are internationally recognised as cradles of civilisation. We both have abundant energy resources in the form of natural gas and oil. But that is where our stories diverge. Unlike our fellow countrymen and countrywomen, Syrians are being killed and arrested for wanting a voice in the government of their country, for wanting their government to be based on democratic principles such as freedom of speech, the right to peacefully assemble, equality under the rule of law, and the right to choose one's own leaders. These killings and arrests have to stop. The Syrian human rights organisation, Syria, estimates the number of civilians killed at least 1,100 since pro-democracy protests started in Deira on March 18. In May, Syrian security forces went into the central city of Homs to suppress pro-democracy activists. A 12-year-old boy was killed as a result of the use of tanks and machine gun fire against civilians. The situation has continued to worsen. Recently, Reuters reported that 27 civilians were killed over 3 days as Syrian security forces used tanks to crack down on pro-democracy protesters in the Lebanese border town of Tel Kalaka. The tragic irony is that the Syrian constitution guarantees in Article 25 that freedom is a sacred right. It also promises that the role of the state is to protect the personal freedom of its citizens and to safeguard their dignity and their security. The killing of civilians and acts of intimidation and violence are intolerable, and they must stop. The Australian government's taken a number of steps to pressure the Syrian regime to cease the violence and implement genuine political and economic reform. We've imposed targeted financial sanctions against those responsible for ordering human rights abuses and the lethal suppression of peaceful protests. We're bringing pressure to bear against key regime figures responsible for this violence and suppression, and have imposed an embargo on arms and other equipment used in the repression of Syrian civilians. We've co-sponsored a resolution in the United Nations Human Rights Council condemning the use of lethal force against protesters. And the Foreign Minister today wrote to the President of the United Nations Security Council, referring the Syrian leadership to the International Criminal Court. Since protests began, diplomats and human rights activists say as many as 8,000 people have been jailed or are simply missing. Leading dissident Riyad Saif has been arrested and imprisoned in 2001, 2008 and most recently on the 6th of May this year. His supposed crime? To build a new political movement through the Damascus Declaration to compete with the ruling Ba'ath Party. A movement to be based on human rights, pluralism, press and academic freedoms, and the building of a civil society. The right to express one's views and protest peacefully is a right we in Australia take for granted. It's such a part of our heritage and our national values that to question the right meets with fierce opposition. Yet in Syria, this fundamental democratic and human right comes at a deadly cost. The Syrian people have shown remarkable courage in demanding this for themselves. As one Syrian man, Mohammed al-Dandashi, told journalists, they are punishing us for demonstrating against the regime. President al-Assad should stop the brutal and fatal suppression by his security forces and support the legitimate democratic aspirations of Syrians by making simple yet profound choices. Stability over instability, growth over decay, peace over violence, trust over suspicion, confidence over fear. These are the characteristics of a modern nation that is a responsible global citizen and whose people are empowered to take advantage of the opportunities the century presents. These are the choices now faced by President al-Assad. I'm proud to be part of a government that, when it sees abuses and violations of human rights, here or overseas, takes decisive action, because it is the decent thing to do. Perhaps Syrian poet and dissident Faraj Ahmed Bayakar best describes the overwhelming desire of his people for democratic and universal human freedoms when he wrote from within Sayanda prison, "Freedom is a homeland and my country in exile."